6th of June, 1944. Before the first blush of dawn paints the Normandy coast, the world holds its breath. A new day is coming, a day that will be written in blood and valor. But for now, there is only the deep, rumbling darkness and the cold slap of the English Channel. Out on the water, a city of steel and men rises and falls with the waves. The largest armada ever assembled is poised to strike. This is Operation Overlord. This is D-Day. The plan, meticulously crafted over years, is a symphony of destruction. It begins with a crescendo of fire, a bombardment so immense it's meant to pulverize the very foundations of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. From the skies, a storm of steel is unleashed. Thousands of Allied bombers, heavyweights of the 8th Air Force, drone through the pre-dawn gloom. Their target, the German fortifications dotting the coastline, especially the strong points overlooking the stretch of sand code named Omaha Beach. Below them, a fleet of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers adds its voice to the chorus. The naval guns roar, hurling shells the size of small cars towards the shore. The USS Texas, the USS Arkansas, and their brethren Spitfire, their salvos arcing across the gray water. The sound is apocalyptic, a man-made earthquake designed to tear the German defenses to shreds, to crater the bunkers, sever communication lines, and shatter the morale of anyone waiting in the trenches. On paper, it's a perfect overture to invasion. It is designed to ensure that when the first American soldiers hit the sand, they will step onto a landscape of rubble, facing a dazed and broken enemy. But war is a messy, unpredictable beast, and the symphony is already falling out of tune. A thick, low-lying bank of cloud and fog hugs the coastline, a stubborn gray blanket that obscures everything. The pilots, flying blind, face a terrible choice. Drop their bombs too early, and they might hit their own invasion fleet. Drop them latte, and they risk missing the defenses entirely. With strict orders to avoid friendly fire at all costs, most pilots delay their release. The result is a catastrophic failure. The earth-shaking payload of thousands of bombs, intended to obliterate the gun emplacements on the bluffs, falls harmlessly miles inland. French fields and farmhouses, far from the beach, are churned into mud and splinters. The men in the German bunkers at Omaha feel the ground tremble. They hear the distant thunder, but the steel rain never comes. The concrete and earth around them remain untouched. The naval bombardment fares little better. The gunners, peering through their sights, struggle to pinpoint their targets in the smoke and mist. Many of their shells sail clean over the bluffs, landing behind the German lines. Others fall short, exploding uselessly in the surf. While some hits are scored, the core of the German defense network, the machine gun nests, the trench systems remains terrifyingly intact. Then, as suddenly as it began, the bombardment ceases. An eerie, unnatural silence descends, broken only by the churning of the sea and the drone of landing craft engines. The firestorm has passed. On the American ships, there's a grim satisfaction. The job is done. The beach has been softened up. Now, it's the infantry's turn, crammed into the cold, steel wombs of the Higgins boats. Men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions are tossed by the violent, choppy waves. They are cold, seasick, and soaked to the bone, but they are also filled with a tense, nervous confidence. They've been told the bombardment would pave their way. They imagine a cratered, smoken landscape, a walkover. Their biggest worry is mopping up the dazed survivors. As their landing craft slaps through the waves, churning towards the shore, the first whispers of doubt begin to surface. The mist is thinning now, and the silhouette of the coastline is becoming clearer. The bluffs loom high and menacing. There are no fires, no thick plumes of black smoke. The shoreline looks untouched, quiet, too quiet. The veterans, among them, men who have fought in North Africa and Sicily, feel a cold knot tighten in their stomachs. This isn't right. This isn't what a successful bombardment looks like. Where are the craters? Where is the devastation? The silence from the shore is not the silence of annihilation. It is the silence of anticipation. The silence of a predator waiting for its prey to step into the trap. Through the haze, they can just make out the obstacles the Germans have planted in the tide, the jagged hedgehogs, the menacing poles topped with mines. They are all still there. A deadly garden waiting to rip the bottoms out of their boats. The beach, which was supposed to be a gateway to liberation, now looks like a prison wall. Then, a new sound cuts through the air. It's not the thunder of artillery. It's a sharp, metallic, ripping noise. A German MG-42 machine gun, the weapon they call Hitler's buzzsaw, fires a short, probing burst. Then another joins in, and another. It's a warm-up, a tuning of the instruments of death. A slow, horrifying realization dawns on the men in the boats. The bombs fell wide. The shells overshot. The enemy is not broken. They are not dazed. They are alive, dug in, and looking down their gun sights. The fortress is untouched by the fire, and they are sailing directly into its jaws. The dread is no longer a whisper. It's a cold, hard certainty. The ramps are about to drop, and they are not landing on a battlefield. They are landing in a kill zone. The bombardment that was meant to save them has failed, and the gates of hell are about to open on Omaha Beach. Join us next time as we follow these men onto the sands, into the firestorm of what would become known as Bloody Omaha. The story of D-Day is one of immense courage, born from catastrophic failure. To understand their sacrifice, we must first understand the terror they faced in those first moments. Thank you for watching. The sea was rough, the air thick with the smell of diesel and vomit. For the thousands of American soldiers crammed into the Higgins boats, the final minutes approaching Omaha Beach were a gut-wrenching mix of seasickness and primal fear. They had trained for this moment for months, some 4 years. They were told the pre-invasion bombardment would obliterate the German defenses. They were told the tanks would lead the way, smashing through any remaining resistance. They were told this would be the day they'd start the liberation of Europe. But reality was about to deliver a lesson written in blood. As the steel ramp slammed down into the churning surf, the idyllic image of a French beach evaporated in a terrifying roar. From the bluffs above, a storm of lead ripped through the air. The sound was like a giant tearing a canvas sheet, the unmistakable, high-velocity chatter of the MG-42 machine gun. What the GS would come to call Hitler's buzzsaw. Men who had stood ready, full of bravado and resolve just seconds before, simply ceased to exist. The first wave of soldiers became a wall of flesh and steel that absorbed the initial, brutal volley. They were cut down in neat, terrible rows before their boots even touched the sand. Some were hit while still on the ramps, tumbling back onto their comrades or falling forward into the water, their rifles and heavy packs pulling them under. The surf, already cold and gray, began to blossom with crimson clouds. The chaos was instantaneous and absolute. The carefully laid plans, rehearsed to perfection on English shores, dissolved in a matter of seconds. Amphibious Sherman tanks, designed to provide crucial fire support, met their own swift end. Many launched too far from shore and were swamped by the heavy seas, their crews sinking with them inside their steel coffins. Those that did make it to the beach were easy targets for the German 88mm guns, which had survived the bombardment completely unscathed. They were picked off one by one, brewing up into fiery wrecks that offered little more than grim, smoking landmarks. The combat engineers, tasked with the vital job of clearing the beach obstacles, the maze of steel hedgehogs, Belgian gates, and teller mines were decimated. They carried heavy loads of explosives and were prime targets. A single stray bullet could turn a man and his entire demolition team into a pink mist. Without the engineers, the paths off the beach remained blocked, not just by German obstacles, but by a growing pile of American dead and wrecked equipment. Medics, identifiable by the red crosses on their helmets and armbands, became heroes and martyrs in the same breath. They crawled and scrambled through the carnage, ignoring the bullets zipping past their heads. They dragged wounded men out of the surf, only to watch them die on the sand. They applied tourniquets and pressure bandages, knowing it was a futile gesture for many. The sheer volume of casualties was overwhelming. The beach wasn't just a battlefield, it was an open-air abattoir. For the men who survived the initial sprint from the boats, a new kind of hell awaited. They found themselves pinned down, trapped in what would forever be known as the killing zone. Huddled behind the very steel obstacles they were supposed to destroy, they were completely exposed. The tide was coming in, relentlessly shrinking their tiny pockets of cover. To move forward was to run into a curtain of machine gun fire. To stay put meant waiting for a mortar shell or the rising tide. To retreat was impossible. Paralysis gripped them. This wasn't combat, as they'd been taught. It was industrialized slaughter. Young officers, meant to lead the charge, were often the first to fall, leaving units leaderless and confused. Men who had never seen a dead body were now lying next to the shattered remains of their friends. The noise was a physical thing, the constant, deafening crackle of machine guns, the whistle and crump of mortar, the deafening boom of artillery, and underneath it all, the screams of the wounded and dying. Confusion reigned supreme. Radios were waterlogged or destroyed, severing communication between the beach and the command ships offshore. From the fleet's perspective, Omaha was a black hole. They could see the smoke and hear the thunder, but the lack of progress was terrifying. The plan had not just failed, it had disintegrated. There was no front line, no rear. Only a 500-yard-deep strip of sand where American soldiers were being systematically annihilated. A sense of looming catastrophe began to settle over the survivors. This wasn't just a setback. This was a potential disaster of historic proportions. Every minute, more men were fed into the meat grinder. Every minute, the German gunners on the bluffs continued their grim work, untouched and unopposed. The greatest amphibious assault in history, the pivotal moment of the war in the West, was grinding to a halt on its first, bloodiest mile. Omaha Beach was on the verge of total collapse, threatening to turn the promise of D-Day into a catastrophic failure, a tragedy that would echo for generations. For the men shivering in the red-tinged water, the fight for Europe had been reduced to a desperate fight for the next few inches of sand. The deadliest stretch of sand in the world. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. For the American soldiers of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, this wasn't just a battlefield, it was a meat grinder. The intricate plans, the months of training, the overwhelming force, it all seemed to evaporate the moment the landing craft ramps dropped. They were met with a storm of steel from German machine guns, mortars, and artillery nested in the bluffs above. The initial waves were decimated. Men were cut down in the surf, pinned behind the few obstacles on the beach, or huddled in shock at the base of the massive seawall. The attack had stalled completely. Bodies and wreckage littered the tide line. The living were frozen, paralyzed by fear and the sheer impossibility of their task. It was a perfectly designed kill zone, and the invasion of Europe was teetering on the brink of catastrophic failure. It seemed no one could move, no one could think. The entire operation was just moments away from being pushed back into the sea. In the midst of this chaos, a figure emerges from the churning, red-stained water. He's not a young private fresh for the fight. He's a 51-year-old assistant division commander, Brigadier General Norman Cota. Soaked to the bone, cigar clamped in his teeth, he staggers onto the beach like any other half-drowned soldier. But there's a difference. While others crawl or lie flat, Cota stands up. He begins to walk, not a panicked run, not a cautious crouch, but a steady, almost casual stroll directly into the hailstorm of bullets and explosions. It was a sight so absurd, so contrary to every instinct of survival, that it seemed to defy reality itself. German machine gunners, accustomed to felling men at a distance, must have blinked in disbelief. Soldiers lying face down in the sand lifted their heads, watching this seemingly immortal officer walk through curtains of machine gun fire as if they were nothing more than a passing rain shower. His first stop is a group of terrified soldiers pinned down behind a disabled tank. They are leaderless, shell-shocked, and just trying to stay alive. Cota calmly walks up to them, seemingly oblivious to the bullets snapping past his head. He doesn't scream. He doesn't panic. He just looks at them and asks, "What unit are you?" They stammer their replies. "Well, what are you doing here?" He presses. "We're stopped," one of them replies. Cota's response is simple, direct, and cuts through the fog of war. "Well, gentlemen, we're being killed on the beaches. Let's go inland and be killed." It wasn't an inspiring speech in the traditional sense. It was a blunt statement of fact, delivered with an insane level of calm. And it worked. The sheer audacity of his presence, his refusal to acknowledge the danger, was more powerful than any order. He was a lightning rod for courage. He was showing them that movement, however dangerous, was better than staying put to die. Cota continues his walk along the beach, a one-man catalyst in a field of inertia. He finds officers frozen in place, their command and control shattered. He doesn't berate them. He grabs them by the arm, points up the bluff, and gives simple, direct orders. "Get your men moving." He finds a unit of rangers, the elite of the elite, huddled behind the seawall with the rest. These were the men supposed to be spearheading the assault. He approaches their commander and delivers the line that would become their motto and the legend of military history. "Ete stimumen are rangers." I know you are rangers. Now lead the way. It was a challenge, a reminder of who they were, and an order all in one. It was the spark they needed. The rangers began to organize, to look for a way up, to reclaim their purpose. Cota wasn't just directing traffic. He was personally reigniting the will to fight in every man he met. His leadership was infectious. It spread like fire. He finds a group of combat engineers, their mission to blow gaps in the wire and concrete obstacles. They too are pinned down, their equipment scattered. Cota finds their officer and asks him what the delay is. The officer explains. "The heavy fire." Cota points to the seawall and the bluff beyond. He makes it clear that their work is the key to everything. Spurred by his presence, the engineers get to work. Under withering fire, they begin assembling their Bangalore torpedo-slung pipes packed with explosives. They crawl forward, shove the torpedoes under the wire, and light the fuses. The resulting explosions tear massive holes in the German defenses. For the first time, there are pathways off the beach. It was a critical turning point, and it happened because one man walked into hell and asked people to do their jobs, with gaps now blown in the seawall. Cota knows the next step is the most terrifying. Climbing the steep, exposed bluffs into the teeth of the German defenses. He gathers a small, mismatched group of soldiers around one of the new breaches. They are from different units, strangers to each other, but united now by this one calm/unflinching general. He doesn't give a grand oration. Simply says, "I'll lead you up there myself." And he does. With his pistol in hand, he starts to climb. He leads this small band of men up the treacherous slope, through minefields and machine gun fire. Sina Genera. General personally leading an assault was an electrifying sight for the soldiers still on the beach. If he could do it, they could do it. Small groups began to follow his example, coalescing into squads and platoons, using the gaps the engineers had blown. The paralysis was broken. What Cota did on Omaha Beach was not about grand strategy decided miles away. It was leadership at its most raw, personal, and visceral level. He understood that on that beach, plans were useless. Radios were dead. The only thing that mattered was human will. By walking upright through the bullets, he made himself a symbol. He was telling every soldier who saw him, the fear you feel is real. The danger is real, but it can be overcome. Follow me. He didn't just give orders. He embodied them. He absorbed the fear of an entire army and converted it into action. One historian would later write that Cota was the spirit of the attack. He was the single individual who, more than any other, turned the tide at Omaha. He personally led the first successful penetration of the German lines, opening the first exit off the beach. Once they reached the top of the bluff, the fight was far from over. Cota and his small group had to clear out German machine gun nests and trench systems. He was constantly on the move, directing fire, encouraging his men, and pushing them forward. He had an almost supernatural ability to be where he was needed most, to say the right thing, to make the right decision in the heart of the storm. He restored order from chaos, not by shouting, but by his sheer force of personality and his complete refusal to accept defeat. His actions that morning proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon on a battlefield isn't a tank or a bomb, but a single individual with unbreakable courage. The momentum had shifted. The trickle of men getting off the beach became a stream, then a flood. The foothold was secured. The invasion was saved, and it was saved, in large part, by the 51-year-old general who decided to take a walk. Cota's bravery that day earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, but his real legacy is etched into the history of Omaha Beach and the motto of the U.S. Army Rangers. Rangers, lead the way. He showed that in the darkest of moments, when systems fail and plans fall apart, leadership isn't about rank or authority. It's about taking that first step. It's about standing up when everyone else is down. It's about walking into the fire and showing others the way through. The story of Norman Cota on D-Day is a timeless lesson in courage, and a powerful reminder that one person can, and often does, make all the difference. D-Day, June 6th, 1944. As dawn broke over the Normandy coast, the men of the American 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions stared at their objective, a stretch of sand Cody named Omaha. From the cliff tops, German machine guns, mortars, and artillery were already zeroed in on the water's edge. What was supposed to be a swift, decisive assault quickly descended into a horrifying scene of chaos and carnage. The initial waves were torn to pieces. Landing craft were sunk. Men drowned under the weight of their gear, and those who made it to the beach found themselves pinned down, with no covert, in a relentless storm of fire. The meticulously planned invasion was teetering on the brink of catastrophic failure. For hours, the situation seemed hopeless. The beach was a slaughterhouse, littered with the dead and dying. The vaunted American military machine was paralyzed, trapped in a killing zone. The entire Allied strategy for Western Europe hung by a thread. Amid this chaos, one man refused to accept defeat. Brigadier General Norman Cota, the assistant commander of the 29th Division, landed on the beach and saw the disaster unfolding. Instead of seeking cover, he strode across the sand, dodging bullets and explosions, rallying the terrified, leaderless soldiers. His famous words, "Gentlemen, we are being killed on the beaches. Let's go inland and be killed," were a stark, brutal, but necessary call to action. He understood a fundamental truth of that moment. Staying on the beach meant certain death. The only chance of survival, the only path to victory, was forward. Up Tay Bluffs, into the teeth of the German defenses. He personally led a small group of Rangers in an attack on a German gun emplacement, using grenades and Bangalore torpedoes to blast a gap in the barbed wire. It was a desperate, almost suicidal act. But it created a crack in the seemingly impenetrable Atlantic wall. Cota's leadership was the spark that ignited the flame of a breakthrough. Inspired by his raw courage, small groups of men no longer organized units, but impromptu bands of brothers began to rise from the sand. They realized staying put was a death sentence. The only way out was up. What followed was a brutal, inch-by-inch fight up the steep, treacherous bluffs. This wasn't a grand, coordinated charge. It was a series of desperate, small unit actions. A squad of 5 men here, a group of 8 there, crawling, climbing, and clawing their way up the slopes under a hail of machine gun fire. They used the terrain for cover, moving from one shell crater to the next, firing back with their rifles and tossing grenades into enemy positions. It was a primal struggle for survival. Once they reached the top, the nature of the fight changed. The wide-open beach was replaced by a labyrinth of German trenches and concrete bunkers, the formidable strongpoints that had wreaked such havoc. The fighting became intimate, brutal, and personal. It was hand-to-hand combat in the narrow confines of the trenches. Bayonets, knives, and trenching tools, anything that could be used as a weapon was. American soldiers, fueled by adrenaline and a desire for revenge, fought with a savagery that matched their enemies. They worked their way through the trench systems, clearing one machine gun nest, one mortar pit at a time. This was the slow, methodical unraveling of the German defense from behind. The very guns that had pinned them down on the beach were now being silenced, one, by men who had climbed up from that very same beach. These tiny groups, Often just a handful of survivors from shattered companies became the key to unlocking Omaha. By gaining the high ground, they could finally see the battlefield. They could direct fire onto German positions that were previously hidden. They could outflank the strong points that had seemed invincible from below. They fought with a desperate ingenuity, using captured German weapons against their former owners and coordinating their small attacks with nothing more than hand signals and shouts. The tide began to turn. Slowly, painfully, the German strongpoints fell. The relentless fire that had raked the beach began to slacken. More men were able to get off the sand and join the fight on the bluffs. The trickle of soldiers making it inland became a stream, and then a flow. The beach, once a scene of pure slaughter, was transforming. It was becoming a foothold, a secure, albeit bloody, lodgment on the continent of Europe. By the end of the day, the Americans had established a beachhead, tenuous and costly, but a beachhead nonetheless. Victory at Omaha was secured, but the price was staggering. As the sun set on June 6th, the scale of the sacrifice became horribly clear. The beach was a testament to the cost of freedom. Over 2,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. Entire companies had been effectively wiped out, reduced to a handful of shell-shocked survivors. The triumph of securing the beachhead was forever intertwined with the deep, sobering sorrow of the losses. It was a victory measured in yards gained and friends lost. The sober reality was that Omaha Beach had come perilously close to complete failure. If not for the individual courage of men who refused to give up, if not for the leadership of officers like Norman Cota, the entire D-Day invasion could have been jeopardized. And this brings us to one of the great, overlooked figures of that day, Brigadier General Norman Cota. In the grand narrative of World War II, his name is often a footnote, if it's mentioned at all. Yet, on Omaha Beach, his actions were nothing short of legendary. At the invasion's most critical moment, when everything was on the line, he provided the leadership that saved the day. His courage in the face of unimaginable fire inspired men to do the impossible. He didn't lead from a command post. He led from the front, sharing the same risks as the lowest-ranking private. Many historians argue that his personal bravery and tactical acumen on June 6th were instrumental in preventing a disaster that could have altered the course of the war. He was a hero in the truest sense of the word. And while history may not always remember his name, his legacy is written in the sand of Omaha Beach and in the freedom that was secured there. It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the course of history is turned not by grand armies, but by the will and courage of a few good people.